Ah, the Danganronpa game with too long a name. I reckon we're fine to skip the fluff. Welcome to a retrospective on Ultra Despair, girls. One of, if not the most weird game in the Danganronpa series that somehow takes a legion of psycho kids and makes it deeply layered and compelling, for the most part. To start, where all great stories do, with the gameplay. What? It's the backbone of any random spin-off. Don't look at me like that! Oh, and for your cliche hook, we're gonna answer this question. What was the point of this? What was the point of this? Is that what I wrote, really? Now, riveting, I know, sit with that. If you're interested in that and so much more, then I can't be asked. Just fade out and get to the good stuff, you know? Oh, yeah, music, let's go! Now, the gameplay of UDG is its forefront. It's not exactly amazing or innovative by any means, but the sheer reliability it holds over the entire experience is interesting. For a quick refresh, you've got Komaru. Komaru has this megaphone. Megaphone equals gun and shoots different bullets that do different things. Alt mode, Genocide Jack. She uses scissors and whatever this is to kill people. There you go. All caught up. Immediately, it's clear why this game is janky. Spike are a bunch of idiots. Though, I'm gonna spin it into some insane commentary on... it mirrors Komaru herself. She's very awkward and boring. That's literally how she was written. Yeah, Komaru's a scared rando, improvising with whatever works. Oh, fuck you. The gameplay follows that rhythm to a T. The controls are sloppier than your average YouTube homepage, but that actually fits her perfectly. You're supposed to feel like a civilian who's never held a weapon before, let alone whatever this is, which makes every semi-accurate headshot feel like a tour himself blessed your aim. It's weird and clunky, but like... it's Danganronpa, shut up. This game kind of feels like it's held together by Hope itself, and that's actually not far from the truth. Hello, Nagito. The megaphone gun, right? Not even a gun. PA system with delusions of grandeur Gundam Tanaka. Sure, yeah, just shout break. Yeah, that'll work. Monokuma's everywhere. I mean, where was the impression that this game was anything more than a big inside joke? It's peak Danganronpa, man. What can I say? Stupid, self-aware, bizarrely profound for no reason. And hey, the bullets you're firing represent more than being, you know, bullets. Sick transition. They represent willpower. The weapon literally runs on Komaru's voice, her ability to speak up in a world that silenced every adult. It may be funny both in concept and in practice, but it's not completely mindless just yet. And then we've got the ammo, the truth bullets. Each one's like stupid and I hate it. But anyway, they represent things, I think. Break says fight back. Well, it says break. But yeah, move says solve the puzzle. Dance says humiliate your enemies and kill yourself. You have this whole system based around problem solving, like a weird hybrid of a shooter, a logic puzzle, and an escape room all in one. Oh my god! You're constantly swapping between bullets to find the perfect chain reaction, that domino effect where one shot sets off 10 others. Get it right, and you feel like an idiot because it was easy. Get it wrong, and you feel like an even bigger idiot because it was easy. But that domino style of puzzle is my favorite thing anyway. Many of the combat arenas and challenge rooms operate on the principle of chain reactions. A single input can trigger a cascade of interactions that wipe out the entire bomb squad if you do it right. But yeah, the system rewards players who observe, plan, and predict, echoing that sweet logic of the mainline games. But when a plan collapses, the player is forced to reevaluate their assumptions, which in a way directly parallels the very, very broader narrative theme of growth through error, which is technically Komaru's entire arc anyway, being a fucking failure, but learning from it. And you know how, like, it all comes crashing down, like when you fail? That's kind of the joy of it. Adaptability. You technically can line them all up, but if you fail, just shoot them all and you'll be good. I wouldn't consider this an almighty mirror for the game's themes or whatever, but it's something I should probably note because it's quite cool. Puzzles where you decide how it ends. I like it. Then, of course, we swap to Genocide Jack. She's chaos on legs, pure catharsis compressed into a single character, but you already knew that. Komaru's flailing around, nervously swapping ammo types, and then you press one button and boom, Toko's gone, replaced by a bloodthirsty gremlin who walks like this and carves through Monokumas like Mondo butter. Genocide Jack's inclusion creates a sort of mechanical counterbalance. While Komaru's sections emphasize restraint and actually managing your resources, Jack's gameplay does none of that. It embodies release and immediacy. Her melee combat disregards the limitations that define Komaru's experience. She moves fluidly, attacks rapidly, and exerts complete control over the battlefield. Yet this empowerment is far from unconditional. Her abilities are governed by the battery system, right? Stopping you from relying on her all the time, and stop fleeing from the camera physics. Genocider is meant to be your final hope, and if she was basically pulled into battle whenever you missed a single shot like me, then we're both doing it wrong. In narrative terms, she represents emotional catharsis, the expression of unrestrained instinct, while her limitations reinforce that this catharsis cannot be sustained indefinitely. Now, comparing these two systems, Komaru's whatever works and Jill's whatever works as long as it's sharp and pointy, forms the core rhythm of this game. The player oscillates between analysis and impulse, between thought and action, kinda like this video structure. It creates this sense of psychological balance. Too much of either would collapse the tension the game relies upon. This is exactly what the story itself is trying to portray: duality. Working together to combat whatever's in front of you, and learning when to rely on other things if it becomes too much. I mean, hello, that's basically a summary of Tokomaru as a whole. That's the ship name between Komaru and Toko. Bomb! Hello, let's move on to this here level design here. Something that somehow further enforces this pattern of adaptation. Each new Monokuma variant, from bombers to guards to sirens, they go off a lot around Haiji, force you to think again. Familiar strategies stop working, pushing the player to look at their arsenal in shame and wonder why there's not an option to shoot it backwards. This structure ensures that learning these mechanics is continuous. Don't expect to just sit on your ass and breeze through this fun video game. Of course, you've got to have progression. Now, when I mentioned before about the jankiness being good, well, there's more. Camera issues and shite, often criticized by players, can be interpreted as a simulation of Komaru's inexperience, alright? We talked about this. So earlier in the game, yeah, frustration with how she conducts herself, cowering and breaking down, gradually transform into fluency as the player adapts alongside her, mirroring her actually becoming somewhat competent. The learning curve is actually shown physically before your very eyes through all the issues evening out with Komaru's character development. Right, if you don't believe me, look at these two images. See? One slouch, one not slouch. That's the thing, that's development, viewers. In addition to this, let's talk about the enemies. The enemy design in UDG represents whatever. Each Monokuma variant communicates a distinct social or psychological function. Now listen 1 minute. Guard Monokumas, surveillance, obedience, bit of contrast to the chaos of the tragedy. Their behavior mirrors a world built on constant oversight, where deviation from order is punished, which is weird, isn't it? It completely subverts everything you see around you, like people be bleeding out on the side of the road, fire everywhere with brainwashed kids emoting on dead adults. Why create an enemy so distinct from the order it's supposed to disrupt? I don't really have a clue. What am I, an expert on Monokumas or something? Siren Monokumas, they exist too, introduce this immediate panic. Oh shit, it's Haiji! They weaponize communication, transforming information itself into a mechanism of fear. So you hear those guys, and you're all, oh shit. Whether that's fear or excitement is up to you. Personally, I hear that siren and get excited to split him like a pool noodle wants to come running. It works well, despite how off the rails it is and how far I'm reaching. Now, let's move on briefly to the UI. It's not exactly anything special, I just thought of it while I was skimming through footage. The UI overlays are colourful and stylized, aren't they? Very reminiscent of the sheer absurdity that is UDG, yet they coexist with imagery of destruction and decay. This contrast creates a sort of emotional interference. The player is visually cued to treat events as playful, even when the content itself is grim. The constant reminders, ooh, here, there, maintain a faint sense of detachment, aligning with the world's desensitization to violence. Check it, the Warriors of Hope, that's their whole thing. Maybe that's why the UI here is a bit different to other titles past its actual mechanics. It feels like the kids drew this bit, doesn't it? Their goal of creating paradise from despair and brutality. It's right there in this dissonance. Now, I won't overcomplicate things deeper than that, but for the sake of the argument and keeping the tone light, the UI here is cool, innit? Anyway, moving on. After these high-stakes, intense encounters the game seems to love so much, UDG often transitions into slower segments, dialogue-driven intervals, exploration, or whatever. Now, you're stupid if you think these are merely pacing adjustments, because they're actually psychological necessity. They function as decompression as they should, moments where the player and Komaru process the aftermath of survival. The design here replicates something awfully familiar. Daily life! Daily life! Daily life! Daily life! The relief that follows combat is never clean, but usually battered by exhaustion, or guilt, or toko, in general.
Komaru Naegi? More like Kamaru Naegi.
It reminds me of the god-awful dread I felt after Clash Trials in the main series. They're meant to be checkpoints so you can catch your breath, but they almost feel like their own gameplay element. A gameplay element! As a way to take you out of the carnage and let you process the past few minutes of whatever the hell happened. Okay, so beyond this I want to get a bit meta, because why the heck not, eh? Komaru's primary weapon, Le Hacking Gun, is an instrument of her oppressors, a technological artifact of despair repurposed to serve Hope. It might have been created by the Future Foundation, but it was tampered with for demon hunting by the Warriors of Hope, as if they wanted to play fair by adding a sprinkle of constraint to Komaru's big-ass gun, effectively turning it from a megaphone of hope to, a megaphone of despair. Every use of it reinforces a paradox. She is freeing herself through the very mechanisms designed to contain her. The player participates in this paradox, unconsciously of course, consent is this game's enemy in more ways than one, and I'm pretty sure even the writers didn't consider this like I did, so that makes all of us. As Nagito, servant, says himself, they obey the rules of the system, i.e. game balancing, in order to subvert them. I also just really like how Nagito himself affirmed the game mechanics are canon somehow. I don't know why, I just really like the idea that even outside of the usual writing style, in a spin-off and all, it still had to be tied together with real logic. Fucking Kadaka, you legend. But yeah, I tried my best there to provide a little bit of interpretation on UDG's gameplay. It's not that deep, it never is, and it shouldn't be, but I gotta say, it's fun to just mess around without worrying about getting it wrong. That's where we pivot. Chapter 2, my friends, is where things ramp up to more opinions, mixed with genuine analysis. Interpretation exists, but with some of them, we need a lot of facts to back it up, so character analysis, please roll in the title sequence and enjoy. Hiya pal, I won't fluff this thing out anymore, let's just dive into these characters a bit, shall we? Starting with Komaru herself, of course. So, Komaru is the emotional core of UDG in many ways, isn't she? She's just so fun and cheerful, optimistic in a way many of Danganronpa's protagonists just aren't unless they're really pushed to be. Sure, she has her slip-ups and sometimes Toko needs to slap some sense into her, but for a normal-ass person thrown into a nightmare with no safety net, I think she does a pretty damn good job. In fact, I'd go so far as to say she handles the events of her story in the healthiest way possible, refusing to shy away from showing emotion, crying when she's sad, venting when she's angry, and moving forward when it's necessary. Her character is built on ordinariness, and that's never treated as a flaw even when she thinks it is. Where her brother Makoto was just plopped in as the ultimate lucky student, Komaru has nothing. She's as ordinary as a bag of sand, which to be fair isn't that ordinary anymore, is it? When do you ever see a bag of sand lying around? That's what makes her story so compelling. Her arc is about learning that her lack of distinction doesn't make her lesser, and as she says plenty of times, she's not her brother. I love that dynamic. It's incredible how well they wrote the sister of a beloved protagonist, keeping that I'm not like him trope, yet still pulling off an arc that stands entirely on its own. Her story isn't centered around Makoto as much as Toko wishes it was. Instead, it's about her becoming herself, and through that, she proves to both the player and the world that she truly isn't her brother. The fact that she can do that without even mentioning his name or coming anywhere close to that topic is brilliant. And hey, it's interesting that Komaru's main arc is about becoming someone she's proud of, someone she's finally comfortable being, yet for the most of the game, she doesn't even know who that person is. Sure, she tries to stop being compared to Mr. Ultimate Hope over here, but something I picked up throughout the whole story is that she's basically escaping into a void. At first, she just wants out of Toa City, out of her brother's shadow. but she slowly realizes that she can't stop being compared if she doesn't even know who she is in the first place, and she can't escape without, knowing where she's escaping to. Once that clicks, her arc shifts from running away to self-discovery, and by the end, she manages both. Through finding herself, she naturally separates from her brother and escapes the nightmare that started it all. It's a complete journey, and I'm genuinely impressed by how well it's done. Seeing Komaru finally be proud of herself, it's such a rewarding moment because these protagonists don't give themselves the pat on the back they deserve, pal. She earns it completely. I adore her character through and through, dude. Even further, her role as the protagonist is significant because it reframes what hope means in the Danganronpa universe. In all the other games, hope is often associated with extraordinary individuals in extraordinary situations, prodigies who survive because of their talent, with the protagonist usually being the only exception. At its core, you have this sense of, who else is going to do it but me? It feels like there's nobody else but boring Makoto or Hajime to solve these problems. Then hey, look at UDG, there are thousands of people just like Komaru, in the same boat as her with the same or even greater abilities, willing to fight, yet somehow Komaru comes out on top. That's what I mean by redefinition. Even when there are hundreds in line to become Hope, Komaru rises above them all. In that sense, through Komaru, Hope becomes something accessible, fragile, and honestly, human. She isn't equipped for greatness, yet she continues to move forward because there's no alternative. That persistence, rather than her results, becomes her defining quality. This carries on to the emotional side of things as well. Komaru is kind and empathetic, but her kindness isn't naive. It's repeatedly tested by exposure to all this awful stuff relentlessly, man. Like seriously, every corner of this city has something crazy going on, yet for some reason, Komaru's never desensitized. She stays true to herself, and hell, she becomes even more true to herself through all of it. She's pretty fucking inspirational, isn't she? The tone of this game allows the player to experience despair through the eyes of someone who reacts like a normal person would. It's actually terrifying and feels like a genuine global crisis. It's not exactly eerie and claustrophobic like the mainline games, but it does show how human this situation is at its core. The two sides of humanity, the empathy of people and the primal rage of the animal beneath it all, the part that fights to survive no matter how dignified we convince ourselves we are. She becomes the lens through which the mass suffering of Towa City is made comprehensible, and we've got good old Komaru to thank for that. Perfect protagonist, I'm not messing, she's amazing, let's move on. Toko Fukawa. Toko's got a lot going on in every facet of everything ever, but to be fair, she's probably the best pick for a spin-off. I already like Toko, so it's nothing new for me to just sit here going blah-de-blah, but let's just talk about the development she gets in this game specifically, and if you played it, it's a lot. For starters, she's learning to control Genocide Jack, even if the game doesn't exactly do itself any favors by weaponizing a traumatic disorder. Hey, cool game mechanic though, innit? Still, seeing her running around outside and fully embracing who and what she is kind of beautiful in a definitely twisted way. It's already huge that Genocider can't even emerge on her own anymore. Toko controls the sneezes now. She's starting to process what she's been through, even just a little. And by the start of UDG, Old Mate's already grown up, and the events of this game only enhance that. More than almost any other character in UDG, Toko embodies the idea of internalized despair, meaning despair inward. She's not a victim of externalized forces in the same way others are. They created her circumstances, sure, but how she deals with them is entirely internal. Her self-image is fractured, rooted in trauma, humiliation, and a whole lifetime of rejection. In the first game, that manifested as a lot of self-loathing under the brilliant guise of cruelty. But in UDG, those same traits are still there, only now they have some actual context for once. We finally have time to sit with her for 16 straight hours, and it changes everything, viewers. She's even more broken than we originally thought, damn it. Oddly, though her responses are still funny and raunchy, the game doesn't actually want you to laugh, I don't think. She'll toss out brother complex or something ridiculous, and yeah, it's arguably funny, but this time it feels like some representation instead of just jokes. Her lines spark that, "ooh, that's pretty interesting" kind of thought, rather than a laugh out loud haha funny moment. Oh, for fuck's sake. She feels more capable now, especially next to Komaru's hopeless naivete. The humor surrounding her eccentricities fades, leaving a sharper image of a woman who survives by controlling every part of herself she can. Her curt demeanor and constant self-deprecation are like survival mechanisms, tools to maintain some juggling, circusy balance in her unstable world. In that light, her relationship with Genocide Jack becomes more profound. It's not just like, boom, representation, bad representation anymore. It actually feels like what it's meant to be, an externalization of her fractured identity. I know it took him long enough, but Jack is everything Toko represses, and in UDG, mastering that duality becomes the core of her arc. And when we meet her, Toko's already in the process of reclamation. Jack's under control, as I mentioned earlier. That control symbolizes a step towards integration, a merging of the sides of herself that once lived in denial of each other. She's not cured, and probably never will be by our dumb definition, but she's far more self-aware now. I'm genuinely happy about that. At the start, her motivation seems simple. She's here to save Byakuya and his skinny-ass legs and gorgeous waistline, business as usual. On the surface, it's the same old story, but beneath that, it's a coping mechanism. Yeah, that's right. Roll a ball down a vent across some books and whack me in the head with it, because it's more coping mechanisms. Byakuya represents structure, an anchor. Her obsession with him in Trigger Happy Havoc is less romantic than existential. He gave her direction, a reason to act, and some way to not just collapse and call it a day. That drive carries into UDG and initially defines her behavior. It's even what pushed her to get Jack under control in the first place. She speaks of him constantly, uses him as justification for everything, and filters every decision through, what would Byakuya think? But thankfully, the game unravels that dependency. Her attachment becomes a starting point and not a destination. The more she's forced to act without his influence, the more she realizes her value doesn't hinge on proximity to him every 5 seconds. That doesn't mean she stops caring, she never will, let's not delude ourselves, but it evolves into something less desperate and more grounded. You can even hear that change in how she talks about him. There's respect there now, still plenty of screaming, but hey, progress, eh? That growth fully crystallizes in her final choice to stay behind in Towa City. Once Byakuya is saved, there's no logical reason for her to remain, yet she chooses to. For the first time, Toko acts according to her own sense of purpose. Her attachment evolves into independence, and her identity becomes defined by choice, rather than obligation to, what's his fate, skinny legs. Komaru's presence obviously helps that transition, but the emotional work is entirely Toko's. I'll talk about their relationship later, very later, but this moment is the culmination of everything she's been working toward, realizing she can form new bonds without erasing the old ones, that she can act out of empathy instead of just pure survival. By the end, the Toko that stays behind isn't a sidekick, emphasis on the kick, or a white-haired sexy servant. She's a full person who's reclaimed authorship of her own story. Kinda poetic for the ultimate writing prodigy, innit? So yeah, love Toko, but even better is Masaru Daimon, I reckon. Now that's a funny statement because it's untrue, but Masaru does have some serious place in this game, namely a giant fucking robot. To start off, I have to say Masaru annoys me the second most out of all the Warriors of Hope, bar Monika, because it's Monika, and the most annoying isn't even her fault, but the fault of the sickos writing this game who feel like a 12-year-old falling over is some kind of comedic premise. Now, I love watching kids fall over as much as the next guy, but okay, Masaru, he's a really special pick for me. Out of all the Warriors of Hope, easily the most energetic and idealistic of the bunch. He sees himself as the hero, and he'll bloody tell you as many times as you can stand it. He's also really loud, super excitable to the point of annoyance, and sure, most of the characters here are caricatures in their own way, but Masaru actually feels like a kid, or at least a broken person trying to act like one. Take the others. Nagisa's no kid. He's out here writing full-on theses. Kotoko tries to act innocent, but always slips out a line that no actual child would say, and Jataro, well, he looks like that. Masaru, though, he feels the most childlike, and I think that's important because it shows how trauma doesn't always manifest in recognizable ways. Until his breaking point, the game almost tricks you into thinking he's just another psycho kid, right up until, you know, it all comes crashing down. As the self-proclaimed leader, he carries the burden of morale. Leadership for him has nothing to do with control, but his own worth. Keeping the group together is the only thing he feels qualified to do. That perpetual smile of his acts like armor, a hollow symbol of stability for others, but still his last defense against a Joker moment. He can't afford to show fear or sadness, because if he does, he stops being the strong, confident one. The game slowly chips away at that facade until all that's left is raw insecurity. Masaru's one bad day arrives at the end of chapter 1, and it's disturbing, man, honestly, pretty shocking. It turns his emotional pain into something physical, something we can't look away from. The trembling, the self-harm, and that desperate need to stop himself from shaking externalizes years of abuse that otherwise would have gone unseen. You can imagine him doing that alone, locked away and punished for showing emotion. That's what makes this scene so twisted. It's kind of cathartic for him. He's terrified of being seen as weak, and yet in that moment, he's doing something so deeply personal and traumatic in front of everyone. It's like his pain finally forces its way into the open, completely unfiltered and undeniable. For once, nobody shuts him down, and through that breakdown, he almost validates his own suffering. But yeah, Masaru's an awesome little character and a fun one with plenty of depth to delve into. But next, I suppose we'll just go in chronological order, Jataro Kamuri. He's my favorite. I don't even know why. Jataro represents self-hatred taken to its very overwhelming, ridiculous, reaching extreme. He's simultaneously comedic and tragic, a child who hides behind that self-deprecation for the tragic reason of he both believes it and relies on it for survival. His behavior, while often really, oh my god, is rooted in a desperate need to expect rejection. Every insult he hurls at himself functions as a defense mechanism. If he humiliates himself first, no one else can hurt him. Bada bing, bada boom. Beneath all that lies an unrelenting cycle of, take a guess, abuse. It's always abuse. Jataro's hatred towards himself originates with his mum. She was an asshole, called him ugly despite his inherent beauty, inverting his perception of self and making his appearance synonymous with shame. To exist without covering his face became basically unbearable. The mask he wears is stylized and expressive and reflects this odd distortion, a work of art born from pain. As the little ultimate art, Jataro's talent is inseparable from his trauma. He transforms his burden into something aesthetic, as if by recontextualizing his suffering he can somewhat control it. The irony doesn't leave, it's still there. The art that could have been liberating becomes another layer of the sad birthday cake that only he'll be eating, because nobody else was invited, he has no friends. His talent is both rebellion and submission, a refusal to be seen disguised as a performance of visibility, which is annoying because that's confusing. He becomes an actual art piece, one that would look amazing in a gallery, but ends up ridiculous on a mentally ill kid. And that contradiction defines his character. Jataro wants attention, but only the kind that dehumanizes him. To him, acknowledgement is a concept rather than an actual person. He believes that beauty invites judgment, and therefore, hatred creates a twisted logic where being ugly is his safety net. To be ugly is to be untouchable, free from expectation, desire, or comparison. Through this lens, his behavior in the game makes total sense. If people despise him, they confront his worldview and only hammer home how he already feels. Hatred becomes a form of stability. It's familiar, a rhythm that keeps him grounded, even if it's almost always him dragging along his sentences at 1 word per minute. To move past that a bit, his enjoyment of insults and negativity stems from the same need for control, right? When others hate him, he dictates the terms of engagement. He decides how much of himself they see and what reaction they're allowed to have. Love, in contrast, destabilizes him. Affection demands openness. It invites scrutiny in a way that's only negative if you want it to be. Compliments disrupt the system that keeps him functional because they imply that his self-perception might be wrong. Now, of course, it is. Yeah, it is. Anyway, that threat to his constructed identity explains why he reacts so weirdly to kindness. It undermines the one truth he believes in, that he deserves to be hated. And it's so interesting because it's this weird inversion. Hatred, the very force that destroyed his sense of self, becomes his coping mechanism. It's both poison and medicine for him. He survives by turning suffering into something familiar, by convincing himself that disdain equals attention and that disgust equals worth. Who hurt this kid? Why would you do that? You're a prick. When confronted with compassion, the illusion collapses, leaving him without the emotional tools to process it. Just give up, pal, it's fine. I'll help you because nobody else bothered to. Seriously, what makes Jataro so distinct among the Warriors of Hope as a whole is how quiet his struggle is. He wants to be seen only as a blur, acknowledged without being known. In his ideal world, people would just glance at him and move on, never stopping long enough to judge or empathize. Unfortunately, the way he views it, the safest way to live is to totally erase yourself. but I love him. He's a great character. Listen, viewers. Okay, right, serious hat on for a second. This is some heavy stuff. Just give me a moment. I'll be talking about that one Haiji line that ruined his character, Tokomaru, and Kotoko's unfiltered experience in the next chapter, which is why I'll be putting a proper disclaimer there. Serious discussion of essay, and then lesbians. You get the idea. Serious topics only in chapter 3. Basically, yeah, I'm keeping this chapter light, talking about the less controversial stuff where I can actually interpret rather than having to treat every sentence like a research paper. It's needed sometimes, of course, but when it comes to abuse, especially the kind that relies heavily on accurate portrayal and real understanding, you've got to handle it with precision. That's where I switch gears and go full serious mode. So, for now, expect something a bit lighter for the Kotoko analysis segment. Let's go. She's fucking annoying. Okay, bit strong. She's mildly... Okay. Kotoko gets on my nerves for 2 reasons. 1, the amount of fan service for this underage character. Okay, heavy start. And 2, she's a bit of a brat. Also, out of anyone else, Kotoko probably has the most depth to dig into, but her acting persona makes it eerily hard to tell when she's being genuine. Pfft, an ambiguous character blending truth and lies. Wait till this guy meets Kokichi. You're so funny, viewer. Even though she gets on my nerves, damn is she interesting. To start, her talent as the little ultimate drama is the ultimate way to theme her survival mechanisms, you know, as if survival mechanisms need to be themed. Acting for her is heavy conditioning, especially from such a young age. Considering what she's been through, she would have learned early on that pretending could protect her, that by forcing a smile or pretending to be happy, she could shield that dangerous environment, and, like Masaru in a way, she tries to cheer herself up by acting larger than life, imaginary, and happy. It disconnects her from the world she's trapped in. Danganronpa does a lot of that. Characters that use masks to deflect negative situations as a way of coping with it, and it's surprisingly common in our world too, so I appreciate Kotoko for portraying that. But as with many others in the series, her performance and her authenticity have blurred together so much that she might not even know which is which anymore. That explains her erratic and often uncomfortable phrasing. She's been performing for so long that the mask has become her. Without the fear of breaking down or feeling genuine pain, she leans into the persona completely until it's all that's left. But as we see later in the game, that illusion eventually cracks. In that moment, she's reminded that she isn't the mask. And as a sweet mini arc from that moment, from what I can remember, she tones down a little bit. You can see it when she asks Toko and Komaru for help, or when she joins the finale on the neutral side of the argument. And I'm actually kinda glad they kept her alive, because it allows us not only to see the breakdown and the aftermath, but how she responds to it and grows from it, as opposed to a giant robot exploding and being dragged away by children. Furthermore, taking her talent at face value is one thing, right? You notice it early on, it's all fine and dandy, you forget about it. And then she does that thing. You know that moment where she says something that sounds convincing, turns around and goes, oh, that was acting. I don't know about you, but for me, that recontextualized quite a bit. From that point onward, I was way more cautious around her. She'd always been inconsistent, don't get me wrong, but that moment made me realize it wasn't inconsistency at all, but deliberate ambiguity. Kotoko can lie so convincingly because, as I said, it's all she's ever known. So when she cries and even becomes vulnerable, outside of trigger words, of course, I'm talking more broadly when reacting to certain situations, it's suspect. Because she's learned to lie and internalize that deceit as safety, so you can't help but question it. And that's what makes her the most psychologically complex of all the children, and why I'm breaking my neurons trying to figure her out. She understands manipulation better than any of her peers, and even weaponizes it herself, like when she messes with Monica. She plays along with authority, but never fully commits to it. Her performance keeps her in this strange in-between space, neither rebelling nor submitting, which is why she can tell Monica she hates her guts and loves her all at once. She plays both sides better than Monica ever could. That ambiguity gives her a unique place in the group. She's complicit in what they do, but not loyal to the ideology behind it. I used to be pissed off by how over the top she acted, constantly pandering to Monica and flipping moves to please her. But now in retrospect, it makes perfect sense. Okay, it makes sense? She's cheeky, and as the game unfolds, you start to catch little moments of slight hesitation, hints that she knows exactly what's happening, even if she can't bring herself to admit it. Okay, let's move on here a little bit to my recent favourite Warrior of Hope. Yes, between this and the Jataro segment, I've already switched sides. Nagisa Shingetsu, bro, can you blame me? Right then, Nagisa is, and this better not be controversial, the smartest Warrior of Hope. Of course he is. If I said otherwise, he'd break down. Though, in all seriousness, I'd say he's the most coherent and complete of the group. His whole thing is perfection, to transform intellect from a tool of self-expression and interest into something not so great. Control. Nagisa himself is articulate and rational in a way kids his age shouldn't be, which is why it's understandable that those traits aren't incidental in the slightest. They are scars. His intelligence come down to his shit parents and their coercion. The way they pressured him to embody excellence was nothing more than a trophy to show off. That foundation defines everything surrounding him. His composure seems mature, while the hidden truth is simple as his Karen hairdo. The poor boy was conditioned. He was never allowed to be a child, just constructed as an instrument of validation for others. His parents sat on their asses all day throwing peanuts at him until he became boy genius. Those expectations imposed upon him practically stripped him of emotion, or at least the notion that emotion is a safe thing to express. Nagisa reacts analytically to everything, and I mean everything, including emotion itself. That intellectualism, but the new word unlocked, might be a defense mechanism, but it also gives him this strange kind of clarity. I'm sorry, I had to break character. Unlike the others, Nagisa can talk about his trauma without flinching. When Komaru and Toko ask him what happened, he just answers without hesitation or nothing. He rationalizes it because that's how he maintains control. If he can break his suffering down into bog standard cause and effect, it becomes something that he can understand, something he can contain. But understanding yourself does not mean you're healing. Logic, for all its power, can't soothe raw emotion. That contradiction, I'd argue, defines Nagisa. He can understand his suffering up there in the dome, but my boy cannot escape it emotionally no matter how hard he tries. His composure fractures for that reason. He can comprehend the shit, but he can't take the shit. When his breakdown hits, emphasis on the hit, it's devastating precisely because it follows such restraint. The whole veneer of order collapses under the weight of a child's unacknowledged need for affection. By that point, old Monica doesn't even need to try. She can just take the cheap shot. She tells him she expects nothing of him, and bada boom, it shatters the only framework his identity has ever rested on. His entire life has been built on meeting standards imposed from above. The moment those standards disappear, he's left completely directionless, prime prey for the wild Junko Enoshima species and its secret attack, despair. In that moment, Nagisa's despair becomes legible. Absence. The absence of purpose, of expectations, the same ones he's always freaking out about. His entire life taught him that achievement equals worth, so when that equation collapses, he loses any framework for seeing himself as more than useless. The tragedy isn't just that he was forced into perfectionism, it's that he can't imagine life outside of it. Even when he recognizes his own manipulation, he can't unlearn it. He's too aware to stay blind, yet too conditioned to be free. And that's exactly how it plays out with Monica. The scene is gross, yet it's trying to say something. Nagisa wants to fight back, he knows it's wrong, hell, he writes about it in his diaries, but he can't, it's too much. For once, he actually admits defeat. Maybe he reframes it in his head, right? It's for paradise or whatever, but strip it down to the basics and it's failure. Nothing less, nothing more. And he can't accept that. So he takes back control the only way he knows how, through structure, even if it's hollow. Because for Nagisa, even surrender has to be systemized or he'll self-destruct, I don't know. He needs to feel like he's on some kind of track, that he's working towards a destination, even if it's a dead end. To wrap this up in a crooked little bow that'd make his perfectionism furious, Nagisa's rationalism also contextualizes the group's broader structure. He's the strategist, the one who tries to maintain order within their shared delusion of paradise. But that same precision isolates him. The others, despite their volatility, can still express emotion impulsively. Nagisa can't. His restraint alienates him from the very people who understand his suffering most intimately. He proves it himself through how deeply he cares for them and how he sees their trauma as somehow worse, more worthy of healing than his own. And as with the other warriors, the very thing that defines Nagisa, his intelligence, becomes the root of his downfall, his despair. Good stuff. Right, moving on. Haiji, not yet. We'll keep him as far away from any other character as possible, is what I would say if I were being dismissive, which I am not. Haiji has the unfortunate burden of that one line that ruins his character. Celeste has it, Nekomaru, Jack's Digital Circus, it's a common theme, but Haiji has it the absolute worst. Why is that? Don't play dumb, you know. Haiji's line turns him from a morally complex, lazy bastard with a slight vendetta against children to a scruffy bastard who, well, fill in the blanks. Now, I'm going to be talking about Haiji as a character, what leads up to that moment, and why he actually works before the narrative slaps pedo on his resume. So, if you're here for the "that line ruined him" discussion and want a full critique of Haiji with that context, head to chapter 3. For now, let's talk about who Haiji is, what I liked, what I didn't, and why his character still works on its own. Because there's a lot more nuance to him than just, he's evil. First of all, Haiji is the first adult in the series who actually feels like one. In a franchise dominated by high school students with collective amnesia, he introduces the perspective of a regular-ass adult trying to live in the same catastrophe without plot armor, or being a caricature you cry over once the 20 minutes of screen time is over. Every part of Haiji's character, from his exhaustion, cynicism to his cowardice, aren't the flaws of writing in any way, but the deliberate expressions of what it's actually like to be an adult in amidst the tragedy. He carries so much responsibility. But for what? He has no actual agency to control it, nor structure left to keep it standing, so he's left burdened by the expectations to lead the broken community with nothing. And the way he acts, his behavior, is meant to reflect how all the adults feel about what's happening. They've lost faith. They're all basically sitting ducks looking to survive first and take back control second. Haiji is their symbol, and the only reason why he's even in this position is because of his vague technical knowledge and position as Toa Group's final descendant. He has authority because it's functional, barely, but still functional. Other than that, he's ordinary. The strength of his characterization is rooted in that, because he's not villainous nor heroic, but human in the most uncomfortable way possible. Secondly, the moral complexity of Haiji's role surfaces in every decision he makes, not like he makes many. He's arguably practical, but also cruel for no fucking reason, choosing inaction over risk, and would rather wait with bated breath and scroll Twitter till starvation than do anything honorable in his life. From Komaru and Toko's point of view, this makes him lazy. As Toko yells at him more than once, Haiji refuses to fight for what's right, or so it seems. Yet, he big coward, for reason. He's witnessed failure on a scale that dwarfs one or two girls with hope and a mild death wish. Haiji may be annoying and just a straight up bastard, but dude also saw his family's entire empire fall because of his half-sister. It's tough to come back from that, I'd guess. When he apologizes or admits fault, it comes after a long halt, because admitting guilt for speedrunning a couch potato contest threatens the fragile narrative of survival he has built for himself, and those around him. This duality is meant to mirror both Komaru and Toko, where they're active in their hope and fighting to defy the ones behind this. Haiji is exhausted, bro. Through him, the game explores what happens when hope itself becomes a liability, when the cost of optimism becomes too high to bear. Peep the bear pun. Danganronpa always does this thing where it's like, ooh, I'm gonna become Hope, create my future, blow up the school, blah blah blah. But never has someone been forced to embody hope against their will. Makoto, Hajime, Roboballs, they all wanted to survive. Haiji, he'd rather perish, but he's too stubborn to let the resistance collapse into despair. That's why he created it, to upstage Toa Group's legacy and stand as a beacon of hope. His eventual encounter with the big bad MONOKUMA shifts everything. Gaining power transforms him from hesitant leader to reckless crusader. Suddenly, piloting a giant mech drags out everything he's repressed. We're talking rage, purebred humiliation, and a yummy piece of desperation to take back control. His catharsis is so unbelievably orgasmic, MONOKUMA will do that to you, that's soured into toxicity, and now he's performing this big boy act like it wasn't a normie and a serial killer that got him there. The power fantasy is intoxicating precisely because it reversed his earlier helplessness, yet it also reveals his moral compass was never grounded in principle, but in the awfully convenient circumstance. When powerless, he has to be rational and a pacifist, but now that he has this big bear on his side, dude can do whatever he wants, and what he wants is vengeance. Judge, jury, and executioner. Haiji's turn towards said vengeance chucks out the little humanity he had left, if you can even call it that. What he told us was, yeah, reclaim the city and avenge the adults slaughtered by the preschoolers, and that's understandable, even sympathetic. But the tone of his pursuit soon changes, and now it's more personal. His aggression towards Monica in the final confrontation lays it all bare. the vindictive undercurrent beneath all his righteous talk. That scene reframes Haji as no savior and no strategist, just stupid, pathetic and violent. Everything the Warriors of Hope despise about adults. That's Haji's problem as a character. He fears insignificance. Because of that, a lot of his reactions are just plain ignorant and wrong. And when he's given that chance to fight back, instead of rebuilding, he just lashes out and causes more pain. By the end, his motives are left open to interpretation. Maybe he truly wanted to save the adults and restore order. Maybe he just craved power. Maybe he wanted revenge on Monika. Hell, maybe he wanted to start a music career. It doesn't matter. The point is, Haji was meant to be ambiguous. So yeah, in the end, I hate who he is, but what the writers set up for him, I really like. It's actually interesting. Anyway, moving on to Shiro don't care. Okay, Kuro don't give one. Right then, Monika tell her, everybody. So, Monika is the single most complex figure in UDG, I'd say, because her relationship with despair is self-aware. Why wouldn't it be? But before we get to that, you can probably tell by how eager I am, but I love Monika's character. She pisses me off, irks me, makes me wish she'd be crushed under that rubble a little more than I'd like to admit, but her character is phenomenal. Oh, with that out of the way, yeah, self-aware despair thing. On the surface, it seems that she inherits Junko's ideology, as the remnants of despair have, but for Monika, she looks into it more analytically. She understands it, evaluates and embraces it on her own terms. Unlike many of Junko's victims, Monika's fascination with despair is not naive admiration by any stretch of the imagination. For her, it's conscious. She aligns with Junko because she wants to, and that alone is scary, isn't it? The other Warriors of Hope are manipulated into their actions being for the greater good, but cheeky psycho Monika didn't need any of that fanciness. She knows she's being used and accepts it willingly, as if the idea of being a pawn pleases her because it absolves her of all need to be human. She's not forced to be charismatic or perform humanity like Junko does to manipulate. Monika can just do what she wants, hence why she appoints Masaru and later Nagisa as the leaders. It absolves her of that responsibility. Monika idolizes Junko as an idea worth embodying, someone to give her life and purpose to, unlike how the other warriors see her as a savior or a mentor or whatever. Interestingly though, Monika never intends to become Junko's successor herself. She wants to create the successor, to recreate Junko so she can serve beneath her forever, because if she became Junko, she'd be alone again, with no sense of direction. Her gaze turns towards Komaru, whom she interprets as the perfect candidate for the next ultimate despair, since Komaru's hope compared to her brothers, it's boring. But if that were despair, we got a yin-yang of the century right here. Monika's logic is perverse but oddly consistent. Hope and despair must exist in tension, right? Constantly. If one of them dies, both of them do. In targeting Komaru, she's trying to engineer that collapse. Moving on, what separates Monika and Big Sis Fucko or whatever is her scale. Junko's despair was theatrical and exaggerated, mixed with the undercurrent of her ultimate analyst ability and manipulation skills, like a fine elixir. Monika's, by contrast, is intimate and grounded, like a pint of Stella. She lacks Junko's charm, irony, everything, even the corny jokes, thank goodness. She is incapable of pulling off mass manipulation on a global scale because Monika is a manipulator of individuals. Her talent lies in identifying already broken people she knows quite well and pushing them further to their breaking point while showing them love and affection. In that sense, Monika's cruelty feels more human than Junko's, and therefore more disturbing. Her methods reflect this difference, rather than constructing elaborate killing games where Fat, Pervert, and Hall Monitor duke it out over their AI girlfriend in a battle royale for the victory royale. Monika's just like, no, you feel safe. The Warriors of Hope believe they're united by shared purpose. Ha! Get a lot of these losers. But no, they are not, because Monika sustains that illusion only to exploit it. She understands the trauma of each member, the weakness that define them, and reinforces it to maintain control. She sells them the idea of paradise to keep them docile and complicit. It's almost the inverse of how Junko did it. Junko just said, kill, 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 and laughed from the sidelines, but Monika nurtures her victims, convinces them it's right, which honestly might be even worse. Okay, yeah, it's definitely worse. The absence of that responsibility is perfect for old Monika. She has no need to justify or romanticize her actions. When she admits to hatred, to pain, to finding satisfaction in destruction, she does so plainly. That lack of guilt or flourish in any way turns her cruelty into something almost banal. Indifference, just Monika. Insert adverb to move us along, and her acceptance of manipulation as choice adds another layer to the Monika birthday cake of shame. Monika acknowledges her past and shit, like I said, in a he's bad, she's good kind of way, very basic, then reinterprets it as empowerment. If she was manipulated, it was because she allowed it, sure buddy. If she caused suffering, it's because she chose to. Now, I agree with that. This creates such a chilling sense that Monika had almost reclaimed her trauma by owning it as her identity. Like she's shitting on the idea of trauma as something we should heal from. She derives strength from the idea that she cannot be pitied. It's so depraved that it makes her, and I say this with complete conviction, one of the most unsettlingly independent characters in the series. So, in conclusion, or whatever, Monika's characterization challenges the very foundation of morality in Danganronpa. She is innocence, but redefined into something awful, a child who understands evil and accepts it as her own. Her calmness, and how little spectacle she needs to be strong while finding comfort in malice, it kinda kicks Junko in the face, because Monika is authentic in a way she never was. Anywho, moving on, I reckon chapter 3 is here, so we'll be diving into the story itself this time, and along the way, expect a lot of critique. This is where all the good stuff I've said comes crashing down into the real depravity of this beautiful, awful, fascinating shitstorm of a game. In a bit, pal. Well, to start off, I don't really know what I'm doing here, to be honest. Great, exactly what you want to hear from your esteemed favourite video essayist. Yeah, but what I actually mean is that UDG isn't built for a story chapter like I usually do. The plot's just kind of there. It's happening in the background while the real focus is on character moments and fleshing out the villains with their tragic backstories and the sexualization of minors, which makes up an alarming percentage of this game, apparently. Main point being, I can't go through this like it's beautifully written, because it's not. So instead, we're going to touch on each chapter here and there, but mostly, I'll be dipping into my critiques and stray thoughts about the plot as a whole, what it does well, what it doesn't, what it accidentally represents, because you and I both know the writers did not try and make this thing complex in any way. To start off, each chapter of UDG has a kind of recognizable rhythm to it. You got this blah blah gameplay and revelation bit, then the confrontation, the emotional collapse, and finally the execution. Yet, despite that formula being repeated, every act, thankfully, feels distinct. The game deliberately varies the forms of despair it presents, allowing each of the crazy wacko kids to embody a unique manifestation of trauma. I know, we went there pretty fast, didn't we? Now, the mainline titles hinge on mystery and revelation, which is funny in context since UDG has none of that, so how do they keep things flowing? Usually, it's empathy. The antagonists are known, their faces, their pain, all visible, and with that, the unraveling of said pain becomes inevitable. What sustains us as players isn't guessing who did it, but understanding why. A complete mix-up from the usual, no, that's wrong, and who done it? Was it the gambler, or the... Chapter 1 kicks us right in the nuts, introducing that pattern with shock. Masaru's breakdown is visceral and immediate, the rawest and most physical of the five. As the loudest and most extroverted of them, his despair had to manifest in the body, through motion and violence. The entire sequence of him harming himself is deliberately graphic, establishing early that this game will not intellectualize suffering. Masaru's chapter teaches the player to pay attention. It sets the tone of unpredictability, and importantly, the game never reuses that same level of physical shock again. It serves its purpose once to establish stakes and throws into the wildfire, then it moves forward. I respect that heavily. As you can see, I'm starting off positive because it's only downhill from here. Chapter 2 shifts from the physical to the psychological, understandably, since there's not much physical left of Art Gallery Boy over here that isn't painted over. Seriously though, Jotaro turns the camera inward, replacing the physical pain with something much more ambiguous. His self-loathing expressed through humor and self-deprecation is confusing rather than horrifying. The player is forced to think about why he behaves as he does, to interpret the performance in a way Chapter 1 didn't ask us to. It basically subverts the first act, showing us that trauma isn't always loud and visually horrifying, it can be invisible and still consume everything. Chapter 3 is, oh boy, it's awfully realistic, uncannily so, after how Kotoko's been treated up to this point. The way she breaks down is awfully recognizable, with all the shaking, the crying, repeating words over and over to soothe herself. It resembles what we imagine as a panic or dissociative episode too well. It almost feels theatrical, cliche even, yet somehow it hits twice as hard. Because despite being staged like a performance, it doesn't feel fictional, it does feel real, I'll give him that. And thank goodness this particular moment doesn't objectify her. It's like a completely different writing team handled that scene, until the execution, of course. Fucking sickos. Okay, not yet. But yeah, rather than glamorizing it, UDG presents a genuine, painful moment of loss of control. It lets the player sit in that discomfort without all the voyeurism. And I can't believe I'm saying this. Bare minimum, by the way. But I respect that. Anyway, moving on, and chapter 4 turns inward once again. A little bit different because it comes from the lens of Nagito's composure instead of Jataro's stupidness. In addition to this, it's also heavily foreshadowing like the rest, as we get to meet Nagisa in person and see how complex his morals actually are, and then we see Monika take advantage of him, and it breaks us alongside him. That slow unraveling leads to this big moment, crashing through the ceiling in a giant bionicle, watching Nagisa the sage, this rational calm figure, finally succumb to emotion. It hurts, because it proves he's no different from his friends once they broke. All that effort to rise above, to be logical and controlled, it crumbles. From his perspective, giving up that composure means losing everything he worked to be, so when the mech looms over him and he just stands there wide-eyed and petrified, letting it fall, it's heartbreaking, but bittersweetly, it's relief too. For once, Nagisa makes a choice for himself. His surrender becomes an act of freedom, an end to the pressure and the expectations he so rambles on about. Sometimes the greatest thing you can tell yourself is, it's okay to stop. Look at his face. That pain, that horror. He'd rather face that than another moment of living under someone else's expectations. And that's what makes him so complex, and why he's my favourite character in the game. And why this scene is great. Yeah, got carried away there. And of course, the final act. Storm Tower Hill, sprint to victory, Big Bang Monokuma. Basically, Monika gets defeated, and after Kurakuma gets Kurakaboomed, we're left with nothing. The game abandons structure entirely for about 5 fleeting minutes. What remains now is argument. They just kind of fight. Not in a fun way, in a sad, deliberate, end-of-the-world way. The battle collapses into a verbal confrontation between Haiji's banshee shrieking and arrogant desperation, Toko's wavering stutters, Monika's calm psyop, and Komaru's, by extension our, confusion. Each one represents a distinct reaction to despair. The scene unfolds like every 5th chapter does, a trial with no verdict. Poetic as a poet can get. I'm getting goosebumps just writing this. There's no winner in the end, no matter how much anime, Pokemon, power of friendship shit you throw at the giant robot afterwards. It reminds me of that post-trial silence, the moment after the votes are cast, when the killer's revealed and all that's left is to look him in the eye. It's here that UDG most closely resembles its parent series. The closing chapter fucks off the spin-off premise and reclaims Danganronpa's core identity, a story about people stripped down to their principles. Once the machines and ideologies are gone, what's left are broken voices arguing over what to do next. That indecision, that inability to find satisfaction in victory, is what gives the ending its weight. And in retrospect, the chapter structure of UDG reveals a deliberate emotional architecture. Each act channels trauma through a different sense, the physical, the psychological, emotional, and intellectual, culminating in a final quiet confrontation of ideology that fades into silence. And there we go, poetic. Nagito's here too. Yeah, the servant. Despair hates him, Hope hates him, you hate him for barging in and ruining that beautiful moment. So, what Nagito represents in this game is kind of foggy. I was just happy to see him, honestly, so I figured why not talk about him. His whole ideology of creating despair to foster a greater hope is just such a brilliant way to justify things that don't really need justifying. Like, why take away all of Komaru's truth bullets? You gotta fight with less, that's where the hope shines. Why save Monika? Because no hope and no despair means no homosexual. Monika will be the next Junko, yada yada yada. It's just It's just such a funny concept to me, especially considering who we're talking about. Mr. Unsolvable Case himself popping in and out of nowhere like the least brainwashed person alive. And like, I hate Junko, but I love her so much I hate her? Brother, in what universe does that even make sense? Well. Ultimately, Nagito represents the same side of the coin as Shirokuma and Kurokuma. They're sculptures of Junko's design, made to spread despair and crush hope. But they all do it differently. Shirokuma roots for despair through creating hope. Kurokuma roots for despair through creating despair. And Nagito, he roots for hope by creating despair. That's the ideological triad of UDG, and the only reason the game actually keeps pushing forward. And I find that dynamic fascinating. If it weren't for two bears and a mentally ill infomaniac, we'd have no game. So thanks, guys. Actually, maybe we'd be better off without UDG. But I won't go all hyper over it here, so if you've got any of your own thoughts about that relationship, please share them. I love Nagito, even if he did jack shit here besides spouting exposition and hopeful monologues. Then again, that's kind of his whole brand, innit? Moving on, I'd like to touch on characters like Taichi, Yuta, and Hiroko. They're all memorable parts of UDG, and also a great way to keep things light before my critiques come rolling in. Now, they each serve a purpose here and there while they're alive and well, but overall, they speak more to us, the players, than to the protagonists. They're almost like little reminders, people to call out and recognize. Having that connection to their trigger-happy Havoc loved one instantly links them to us. You want to learn about them, their dynamic, and whether they were supportive or demanding in the often traumatic backstories of your favourite characters. I just think they're a really thoughtful addition. Hearing Taichi talk about his kid when you know things he doesn't is... yeah, it's tough. You feel that connection to both him and his son, who you last saw with his eyes halfway out his skull while you screamed insults at the guy who did it until he got turned into butter. Real connection, that's what I'm calling it. Anyway, it's genuinely adorable to hear him reference those moments, especially with the hitless target card she delivered to Hiroko, who, by the way, gave birth to Hagakure. No, that's not right. The way Toko hesitates at the names and descriptions tell you everything. It gives context to how she feels after all this time, still haunted and still grieving that loss, still snarky about it, because that's all she can manage. One critique though, I'm sorry, but Toko never name drops anyone. She never outright mentions what happened at the academy, which is like, I'd like if she did, so I could point and soy jack, but I get it, it's traumatic, not a deal breaker. It's traumatic, not a deal breaker, that's the line I wrote. Even hearing names like Taka or Sakura would probably break her to shattered shreds on the shitty chateau floor, but to be fair, they write it cleverly. She stays vague on the surface, but the meaning's crystal clear. That's where the fun comes from. It feels like an inside joke between her and the player. But yeah, these side figures scattered around the game are fantastic for fans and make UDG actually feel like a spin-off, like it's something made for people who love the series and just want to see a little bit more of this world. But now, disclaimer. First off, boundaries. Awfully prudent in this segment over anything else. I know jack shit about SA. I'm not a trained professional. What I'm going to talk about are the parts that personally made me and a lot of others uncomfortable, and why Kotoko's portrayal is in poor taste and absolutely disgusting. I won't dive too deep into how it could have been done better, because quite frankly I have no clue. I'll just go through what should have been removed, or better yet, never thought of in the first place. From there, hopefully, people who are educated on this topic can swoop in and actually provide ways to build on the foundations I'll be mercilessly cutting it down to. Anywho, Kotoko Utsugi, Danganronpa's most disrespected character. That's the tagline I'm running with, but let's drop into something more serious, alright? Kotoko's portrayal is utterly deplorable, and I refuse to sugarcoat it. She represents one of the series' lowest points in writing and direction. Her characterization revolves around the idea of hypersexualization as a trauma response, a child attempting to reclaim control over a body that's been utterly violated and commodified. On paper, that's a legitimate, even courageous theme to explore. The problem lies in how UDG frames it. Like, instead of using her dialogue and behaviour to critique or parody the language of exploitation, the narrative just collapses into the very gaze it should be condemning. From a first scene onward, the text substitutes nuance for shock. Kotoko's lines rely on vulgar innuendos and sexual references that serve no narrative or psychological purpose. There's something to be said for needless vulgarity in adult characters, where it can be satirical, absurd, or even funny, but in children, you can't afford to that up. Child exploitation exists on an entirely different level of the iceberg, one even fiction should recognize and treat with care. Now, the justification that her behavior reflects forced maturity might hold if the framing were empathetic, but it isn't. The direction turns those moments into spectacle, positioning us, the players, as twisted voyeurs rather than witnesses. What begins as a depiction of a child imitating the adult language that harmed her becomes a scenario in which the player is made complicit in the same dynamic, and that's what makes it so disgusting. I want to bring up the scene in Komaru's cell early in Chapter 3, just to start off on something that's simple to talk about. Kozuko enters the room, she falls over, and the camera points where it shouldn't. Immediately, instead of introducing her through ideology or pain, we're introduced to her body. The frame in itself becomes the punchline. Good one. It breaks the narrative's focus to create an image that has no justification within her arc or the tone of the story so far. For a plot centered on a child who's been objectified and used, the decision to stage an animator like this undermines everything the game should want to explore. I can't take it seriously, I just feel like a creep. Why are we focusing on this? It's awful, I hate it. Is this really how a game trying to discuss child abuse should treat its characters? The answer is a resounding no, absolutely not. And because of that, everything afterward becomes whatever. Her hatred towards adults, something that could have offered insight into her anger and projection, turns into background noise, drowned out by the one thing this game keeps throwing in my face. I don't want to learn about her anymore. I don't care. I just want her off the screen. And that's not the feeling you want to evoke in your players, especially fans who came here because they love Danganronpa's writing. It's a kick in the face to everything this series usually does right. At least in the other games, fan service was intentional, right? It was done by adults for a reason that linked back to their character, directed at other adults, and gone in 5 seconds. Here, it's constant, and it centers on a character whose entire story is about exploitation. She doesn't deserve it. No one does. And moving forward, because it only gets worse, we reach the motivation minigame. The only thing keeping me going with this topic is knowing I'm calling out something that deserves to be called out. Beyond that, I get no pleasure from hating on this. But yeah, the minigame is where UDG crosses a line it can never recover from. It's staged like a boss encounter, but what the player is forced to interact with isn't combat at first, but actual sexual violence. Komaru is restrained and repeatedly groped by mechanical hands. It isn't metaphorical, nor censored. The game frames it as motivation, referencing how that word was twisted by Kozuko's exploitative parents, but there's nothing symbolic about this imagery. It's the literalization of violation, and the player is required to sit through it as an interactive prompt, as if it's completely normal. The problem, aside from the scene just existing, which is bad enough, is that the framing robs both the characters and the audience of dignity. Kozuko, a child survivor of sexual abuse, is the architect of this game. Maybe the intention was to represent the cycle of trauma, hurt people, an abuse survivor repeating what was done to her. But the presentation destroys that meaning to the point of just straight up damnation. The tone is wrong, the visuals are nauseating, the forced participation transforms the player into an unwilling accomplice. I don't care what you say, it's just shock value and I can't excuse it. Then it gets worse. Genocide Jack intervenes, and now this supposed act of rescue involves her using her scissors to, and I can't believe I'm saying this, cut away Kozuko's costume, leaving the child partially undressed on screen. If that isn't a sentence to give you hemorrhoids, I don't know what is. Once again, the game tries to tackle the issue, but ends up adding to it. It violates Kozuko, it violates us, and we're forced to go through it just to progress. I don't feel catharsis from this. I just feel contaminated, like I should just take a swab to every inch of my body and scrub myself clean. It feels predatory. That's the word I was looking for. It ignores consent, both narrative and player consent, to the point that nobody is left unscathed, not even the fictional characters. The dialogue surrounding this scene too, just amplifies the damage. Kozuko calls Komaru and jokes that she is actually 18, and delivers the line,
"By the way, this is the opposite of child, so it's A-okay to put in a video game."
One of the single most appalling sentences in the entire series. Each line trivializes real trauma by using the language of abuse as wordplay, like it's something to experiment with. In context, these jokes do not expose the horror of what Kozuko endured. It feels weaponized for discomfort and the sake of being edgy for edge's sake. The result is an entire chapter that alternates the player entirely. I should be empathizing with Kozuko's pain, not recoiling from the game itself. What's most disturbing is that the scene forces the same loss of control on the player that Kotoko's suffered. We can't stop it, we can't look away, and participation is required. Of course, it's not a direct comparison, but the essence I feel like we should focus on. It doesn't help that narratively this was meant to be Kotoko's chapter, where the facade performance shatters and we see the full cost of her trauma, and instead, we just get abuse turned into gameplay and humour like it's just another set piece. Kotoko's story deserved empathy. What it received was exposure, brutal and humiliating, just so wrong. And in doing so, the game manages to violate both its own character and its audience. And I'll give it this. It's not exactly something I've ever seen before, and I imagine there's a very good reason for that. But to conclude this critique, even if it wasn't the deepest dive in the video essay ocean, I just feel distraught for Kotoko. Maybe it's just instincts, but it's awful to think that a child character was handled this terribly by narrative. My heart genuinely bleeds for her, she's not even real, and for anyone who was affected by her portrayal too, because I get it. For once, I completely understand how a character could offend you. It offended me, and I can only imagine how much worse it must be for people who do relate to her struggles. It's outrageous behaviour. Now don't worry, I'll pivot to a really nice bit next, to then dive back down again with Haiji, and finally climb back up in the last chapter, which will be all about shipping. So please, don't leave just yet. The Warriors of Hope represent an interesting concept, don't they? Each one is kind of a caricature of themselves, right? For example, here's my little list. Masaru is loud and prideful. Jataro is grumpy and pathetic. Kotoko is cheerful and performative. Nagisa is analytical and pessimistic. And Monika is calm and reserved. Together, they form something straight out of a cartoon. I mean, technically, they are in one, but I'm talking Saturday morning cartoon evil syndicate levels of characterization here. And honestly, that's an important feature the writers were going for. Despite how over the top they act, each of them is grounded by moments of genuine reality. They were built to contrast one another like a perfectly unbalanced team. Everyone has a role, but those roles, emotionally speaking, are rooted in that trauma. That's what makes them tragic. It proves that being forced into a single box with no other defining traits eventually breaks a person, and often it's already broken people who cram themselves into those boxes to begin with, because they've been taught that's all they are. In other words, when someone's individuality is stripped away, they end up becoming a caricature defined by one exaggerated trait that masks the pain underneath, and that's exactly what the Warriors of Hope are. They function as a unit because each one fulfills their assigned class, so to speak. It's when they try to break outside that role that everything falls apart. Masaru, the leader, starts shaking, something he sees as weakness. Leaders aren't supposed to show fear, so when he does, he sees himself as pathetic and unworthy. That's what causes his breakdown. Jataro is used to being hated by one or two people, but when the whole room of kids boo him, it overwhelms him. He forces himself to embrace every insult, breaking under the pressure of being the priest, a figure who exists to be spoken through rather than to. In his mind, he becomes a vessel for others to use however they please, much like how a priest becomes a cipher for confession, if you know what I mean. Kotoko becomes the fighter because that's all she's ever wanted, to fight back. Her trauma ties so deeply to helplessness that the physical act of resistance defines her, but when her attempts fail, she gives in to her execution. Interestingly, she's the only one whose breakdown doesn't come from leaving her role, it's triggered by a word. And that makes her the outlier, and fittingly, her execution is the only one that fails. Good stuff. Nagisa is the sage, wisdom and intellect beyond his years. He wears a title far above his age range because he believes he must rise above his peers. Ironically, be the adult in the room. Silly Nagisa, you should be slaughtering them, not becoming them. When he's manipulated and sidelined, when his plan to make Komaru leave Towa City collapses, his identity crumbles. He lashes out, slashing the servant's knees, deservedly, because he'd probably do it himself if he were forced to wear that chain any longer, because a sage who fails even once can't live with himself. That single failure defines his fall. Monika, finally, is the mage casting spells from afar, manipulating others to act in her stead. Her magic fades once she's lost her pawns, and with the warriors gone, she stops being the mage altogether. Boom. What do you think of that little intermission, eh? Nice breather, yeah? Now, do I put a disclaimer on this next bit? I don't think so. I'm going to put it there anyway, but yeah. We're going to be talking about a certain line that leads to a certain thing on screen right now, but don't worry, I'll barely mention it, I'll just call it that one line, so you should be fine here, I promise. Right then, Haiji. I spoke about him before, how he goes from lazy, scruffy weirdo to prideful egomaniac, and yeah, I still stand by him being an interesting, morally complex character you love to hate. But instead of running with that narrative and expanding on it, the writers decided to turn him into the worst type of person imaginable. Instead of giving us a nuanced choice to love or hate him, they just tell us to and expect that to be what? Accepted? It feels cheap, doesn't it? Of course it does. If a story needs to convince you a character's bad by making them say or do the most overtly evil thing, like admitting they're a predator or threatening to kill a nation of children, it's failed to earn your engagement. If the writing was strong enough, we'd already hate Haiji for who he is. That one line drops suddenly with no reason or build-up, ruins it completely. We actually get to see Haiji devolve into his true colours, and while his actions are pathetic, his motives are understandable. He wants to save those wronged by the monsters that destroyed this world. We can relate to that, even if we can't justify exactly how he does it. That alone worked perfectly because it left Haiji's perception in the hands of the players, letting us decide how we feel about him. Without that one line, he would have been more compelling because hating him would have been our conclusion, not the writer's command. Even if you already disliked him, it would have felt earned. His flaws and choices provided enough nuance for us to reach that opinion naturally. It doesn't matter how you saw him, whether good, evil, ugly, it would have connected you to him because you decided. But I think I've cracked what they were trying to do with that one line. Call me Kirigiri, because I'm about a... They wanted to turn Haiji the coward into Haiji, the embodiment of the worst parts of humanity. Clap now. Think about it. Each warrior of hope represents something that mirrors their trauma, and Haiji embodies all of it. Oh, there's another list. I love lists. Masaru's father was lazy and violent. Haiji is cowardly and refuses to act, letting others suffer while he hides behind excuses. Jataro's mother forced him to wear a mask out of shame. Haiji hides his own shame behind false pride and secrecy, even withholding intel on the Big Bang Monokuma because he's too scared to admit fear. Kutoko's parents exploited her and were predators themselves. Haiji, through that one line, is portrayed as sharing that same corruption. Nagisa's parents demanding perfection from him to fuel their own self-esteem. Haiji's ego and pride drive him to prove himself, taking advantage of others just to validate his worth. In short, he's the adult manifestation of everything the Warriors of Hope despise, the worst of humanity, leading humanity. It's a clever idea in theory, but the execution is a mess. They nailed the cowardice and pride, but fumbled with the most delicate topic entirely. Danganronpa shouldn't tackle issues it can't handle responsibly. There's value in representation, Toko's DID for example, or just overall the way trauma shapes people in this franchise, they're controversial enough. But when a character's entire identity is rooted in said trauma, like Kotoko's, that portrayal has to be sensitive. Throwing in a shock line that exists purely to make us go, "Oi, he's a wrong'un," is just lazy. I wouldn't be surprised if Haiji himself wrote it. The whole situation just disrespects everything around it that already held Haiji's character up. So yeah, he could have been someone you could actually talk about with nuance, like I did earlier, but instead he just feels wasted. But you know who doesn't feel wasted? That's right, Toko and Komaru. The next and final chapter is all about them two. Ooh, I sure do wonder if they contrast each other well. Maybe they're good friends, maybe they're lovers, you'll never know unless you watch to the end or do a quick Google search, but I prefer if you watch to the end. Okay, it's fading out. Toko and Komaru, also known as Tokomaru. What else was I supposed to say? I feel like their bond is UDG in it. We can yap along about random bits here and there, but the core of it is here in these two. When the two meet for the first time, there isn't exactly a lack of tension, but Toko and even Genocider seem to have a soft spot for Komaru. Immediately I can hear you rambling over, "It's because she needs to turn her in for Byakuya, blah blah blah." We get it. But the way she speaks, it's almost pitiful. If Toko saw her purely as an asset, or was trying to manipulate her into trusting her, she shouldn't be so quick to react whenever Komaru doubts herself. Every time Komaru slips up or hesitates, Toko jumps in immediately, as if she has to, like she feels bad for staying quiet. I reckon it's got something to do with Makoto. After all, it's his sister. Maybe Toko's just thinking, if she dies, I'm in deep shit. She's on constant watch over what Komaru says, how she picks her words. So there really is three unique interpretations here. Either Toko needs Komaru to stay alive and hopeful so she can get Byakuya back and turn her in without a body bag. She feels pity for Komaru. Or she respects Makoto's wishes, begrudgingly, and she does her best to keep his sister functional. I mean, you'd respect the guy who literally ended despair and pulled you out of a death game, right? But it's Toko, so best you're gonna get is a backhanded insult? An insult that's somehow a compliment? Anyway, there's immediate chemistry there, and that leads me to my next point. Toko and Komaru are a perfect contrast to each other. Toko is very pessimistic, but she's also a realist. Ironic considering half her life is fantasy, but whatever. She's the grounding force. When Komaru gets overwhelmed by expectations or the constant threat of no escape, Toko literally shakes her and says, "That was one exit, there's probably 100 more, let's keep moving." She's practical, focused, and tethered to reality in a way that Komaru just isn't. Meanwhile, Komaru is the standard, cheery, slightly oblivious protagonist who insists on keeping faith in everyone. When Toko gives up, Komaru becomes the one to pull her back, to remind her to believe in fantasy again, even if only for 5 minutes, just long enough to keep moving. They balance each other out. Toko grounds Komaru, and Komaru lifts Toko. It's exactly the medicine the other needs. Furthermore, there are a few moments that really show how protective these two are of each other, and I'll share a few. Toko and Komaru sleep in the same bed. Komaru takes half the covers, and Toko would rather freeze than wake her up to move them. If this were anyone else, Toko wouldn't even be under the same blanket, let alone stay still enough to keep them comfortable. It's such a small gesture, but it speaks volumes. Not only does she trust Komaru enough to sleep beside her, she also refuses to disturb her comfort. Aww. In Chapter 3, they argue. Komaru accuses Toko of being capable of killing her friends, and Toko fires back.
What? Friends? Did you think I'd feel differently if you started using the word friend? Don't even try it. I won't be fooled.
And that line cuts deep, showing how many times Toko's trust has been broken. Komaru, clearly distraught, doubles down, insisting she really does trust Toko and see her as a friend. Toko immediately backpedals. Beneath her regret, she shifts into protective mode, downplaying Komaru's efforts, pretending she's just tagging along out of pity. But between the lines, you can feel the truth. She wants a reason to stay. If she convinces herself that Komaru is helpless, she has an excuse to remain by her side. It's easier to think she's being useful than to admit she actually gives one. Komaru sees right through that when she says,
You don't have to come with me.
She's giving Toko a choice, not a command. She's saying, you are free to leave, but I'd like you to stay. And that's why it hits hard. Both of them are capable and used to being alone, but they choose each other anyway. There's also little moments where Komaru bites back, disagreeing with Toko when you'd expect her to fold. And unlike with literally anyone else, Toko doesn't lash out or insult her, she just listens. She actually hears her. It's a mutual respect, disguised as tension, and it's beautiful. And then there's probably the most important moment in the game, when Toko has to choose between Byakuya and Komaru. Twice. And both times she chooses both. Even after the servant exposes Toko's initial betrayal, Komaru just forgives her. It don't matter what he or she's saying, all that matters is what Toko is doing, her actions. Toko refuses to give up on her or turn her in. That decision says everything. When given an exit, Komaru stays. When reminded of her deal, Toko declines. That alone proves a genuine change of heart. And maybe the best detail of all, Genocide Jack feels it too. In Chapter 3, Toko hears Komaru's voice calling for her. Panic settles in, and when panic settles in, she gets nervous. When she gets nervous, she sneezes. You know what that means. When Jack emerges, she doesn't hesitate. She just dives headfirst into danger, cutting through Monokumas and running through a train just to save her. That's just great, awesome. We know Toko and Jack don't share memories, but they do share emotions. So the fact that Jack's first instinct is to protect Komaru tells us everything. Later, when Komaru hugs both Toko and Jack without fear, that boundary between them finally dissolves. They both feel the same affection. The only other time that's ever happened was with her obsession with Byakuya, an emotion born from, fantasy. But Komaru's different. This connection isn't fantasy, it is real, and that makes it even stronger. And of course, moving on to their arcs as a pair, both of them contribute to the other's growth in one way or another. A few chapters back I mentioned that Komaru had become more independent, more herself over the course of the game. That's because of Toko constantly snapping her back to reality. Without her, Komaru would have eventually burned out. Her hope would have dimmed and her emotions would have swallowed her whole, and she'd have given up. Toko, on the other hand, has lived through horror so long that she's become half numb to it. That numbness allows her to survive, but it's also quite tragic. Her method is to just keep moving and don't think about it. It turns people into objects she passes by. It's not exactly her fault, it's just how it is, pal. The lesser evil. You push forward, process later, when you're safe enough to cry about it, so, Through that, Komaru learns resilience. Toko keeps her moving until she realizes, hey, I can actually do this myself now. That dependence evolves into confidence. She went from relying on her every 5 minutes like Toko did with Byakuya, just to existing with her. How about that? Toko's arc, meanwhile, is all about opening up, right? In the first game, her burden was learning to accept people after a life of being the super high school level shut-in. But here, she learns to actually trust those people, specifically, Komaru. Komaru's optimism reminds Toko of her brother, the same hope she once witnessed in Makoto and the others when they defeated Junko Enoshima. And what's ironic is that in the middle of a war zone of all things, Toko finally finds the safest place to open up. There's no one to mock her and no classmates to sneer, no one to see her vulnerability except from Komaru. And the occasional Monokuma drone. Through Komaru, Toko learns that fantasy doesn't have to be an escape, but purpose. She spent her entire life writing novels to live in those imaginary worlds, but Komaru shows her she can just bring pieces of that world into reality if she wants. Turn something fictional into something real. Man, I wish I had that power. And if you think about it, Byakuya in that sense is the first fantasy Toko ever made real. A dream she chased until it became tangible somewhat. Komaru just reminds her she can do it again. And what do you call a fantasy made real? Hope. Komaru teaches Toko how to hope again, on her own terms. Right, now for the big question. Toko and Komaru, Tokomaru, is it healthy? As friends, abso-fucking-lutely. See the previous 2,000 words of yap I just unloaded. But as a couple, I'm no romance expert, but I can spot a few patterns the fandom tends to follow. Also, I'll give you my fanboy-y opinion too, so stick around, I guess. Is this how this works? I think we can all agree by the end of UDG, neither of them are ready for romance, far from it. It's been a wild ride with a lot of ups and downs, and even more personal discovery still to come. So for now, keeping them as close friends slowly growing together is the healthiest thing for them. Considering their mission to rebuild Toa City brick by brick, the last thing on their to-do list should be dinner dates when the restaurants are literally on fire. In the short term, what they have is kind of codependence. Komaru comforts Toko, and Toko does the same. So that's not really the foundation for a relationship yet, and that's fine. If making it official would freeze their arcs, it's better to just let it happen naturally, with time and growth, so there's that. Now, one take I see a lot floating around is, want to do a funny voice with this one? Who do you want to do? Nekomaru? Toko would be better off with Komaru than Byakuya! Shit! And I get it. Byakuya is about as averse to women as he is to saying the F word, but that take sort of misses the nuance. It frames Tokomaru not as its own relationship, but as the lesser of two evils. Komaru is an evil, she's a cinnamon roll, but reducing Toko's happiness to who's better for her strips away what actually makes their bond somewhat special. Saying she'd be better off with Komaru doesn't even have to be romantic, it's true for friendship too, so arguing they should be a couple, on the other hand, is a completely different ballgame. Romanticising their bond risks reintroducing the same imbalance they've just escaped. They still rely on each other quite a bit for emotional regulation. Their connection right now is nurturing, but very, very codependent. Toko grounds her stability in Komaru's reassurance, and Komaru finds her courage through Toko's presence, so turning that into romance might amplify those dependencies instead of actually resolving them. So yeah, immediately, I don't ship them. I'm not even really a shipper anyway, but the sheer discourse around these two is interesting to unpack, even analytically, innit? So, the big money question, the actual big one. What kind of people would Komaru and Toko need to become for a relationship to actually work? Well, I'm no therapist once again, but here's my theory. A gay Toko theory! If Toko learns to self-soothe, to rely less on others or on smutty novels for validation, and Komaru learns to see herself as an equal partner, independent and confident in her own right, then we've got a winner. Basically, let them be friends first, let them survive the worst, grow together, and come out the other end as whole people. If they're still clinging by each other's side by then, it's fucking cinema. Actually, yeah, why not? I do think Toko and Komaru could work really well. Guess I am a shipper now. I can never return from this. Say this world keeps spinning beyond the end credits. I'd be rooting for him. Just give it time. But Komaru Genocide Jack is basically canon and perfect in every way. Never toxic dating a serial killer, am I right? Hope you enjoyed this video. Here's my Nagito impression. Hope!